This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, and of course, several important eulogies given at Senator John McCain's funeral service over the weekend. Presidents of the United States, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, but of course the most poignant one was Meghan McCain's, his daughter. I thought it was well-crafted eulogy. She went political, and my reaction in these instances when somebody loses a loved one, clearly somebody that they had a very close relationship with, as it was evident Meghan McCain had a very close relationship with her father, John. You can grieve how you want to grieve. I really don't want to, provide a review or critique of it, but I know that there are some who will, with respect to at least the political content that she offered, and this was her choice, her prerogative, but she took the opportunity, with the world watching, to clearly take a shot at President Trump.
He was a great man. We gather here to mourn the passing of American greatness. The real thing, not cheap rhetoric from men who will never come near the sacrifice he gave so willingly, nor the opportunistic appropriation of those who live lives of comfort and privilege while he suffered and served. He was a great fire who burned bright.
And
it was political. But there's some truth to that.
And she also sort of, I don't know if she was taking a shot. Maybe she thought she was taking a shot at Trump. It sounded like she was taking a shot at Cuomo to some extent, right? When she said America was always great.
Right. Yeah.
So
maybe I don't think the public should be hard on her. She is grieving, and she was very, very close to her father. Also there, President Obama, McCain wanted him to speak at his funeral, and Bush, don't worry, who tried to be, insert a little humor.
Back in the day, he could frustrate me. And I know he'd say the same thing about me. But he also made me better.
Yeah, he also recounted a story before his final debate with John Kerry, where he was the final debate of his political career, George W. Bush's, in 2004, and he was a little nervous. And in the green room before the debate, he's kind of like trying to just channel and find his inner balance. Eyes closed, he opens up his eyes and he says, McCain 6 inches from his face, saying, "Relax." That was pretty funny. For more on John McCain's life and times and funeral service and the politics that surround it, we're pleased to be joined by another American hero. This is a gentleman I had the pleasure to get to know a little bit about 15 years ago when he actually ran in the Republican primary for U.S. Senate. This was in the 2004 cycle. He was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 6.5 years as well in Hanoi. He was a fighter pilot who was shot down and injured. His name he was Captain John Borling at the time, but then he went on to a storied military career. I mean, the awards that he earned are too numerous to list, but they include a Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and 2 Purple Hearts. General John Borling joins us. General, thanks so much for making the time. We appreciate it.
Dan, Amy, nice to be with you this morning from bucolic Michigan, as it turns out.
Yes, well, we miss you in Illinois. By the way, I should mention, too, also a man of letters. I mean, during his time in captivity, he wrote a collection of poems that he turned into a book called Taps on the Walls. So, I mean, just...
well, it's good of you to mention that. The actual construction of that book, you may recall, Dan, was something I composed mentally. There was nothing to write with.
Right, yes.
So,
right.
So I just carried that stuff around with me and tapped it through the walls. That's the name of the book. And in fact, Megan, in her words, talked about tapping through the walls as we were talking about the eulogy. And others memorize them, too, as an exercise in keeping mentally active. I taught French through the walls. I learned Spanish through the walls. We were in isolation or semi-isolation for years, as you may know. And then in 1970 and a little later, they started putting us together in big groups for various reasons. And it was there that I lived with John for a while.
It's just remarkable. I mean, if you can tell us about that experience in captivity with McCain.
Well, John was, I mean, over the years, what you see is what you get. You got a guy who did so much, created so much admiration from so many. On the other hand, was an abject failure and incurred enmity from so many. So it was a pretty normal life for a guy who's high profile. And I think if most of us look at our lives or look in the mirror on a much lesser scale, certainly for me, I can see the same thing, that you go through life, you stub your toe, you stand up, you keep marching, you try to do things that are important for God and country, and we had a perfect example of last night in Michigan.
What's a perfect example?
And it was almost if John McCain was present, I mean, in terms of the spirit. And that is, we had a tornadic-like storm come through our area. Trees down on top of houses, people unable to get out of their houses, cars squashed. I mean, it's going to be in the paper, I'm sure, tomorrow, that big band of storms that came through here. We had one like it 35 years ago. And the same thing happened. All the power's off, power's still off. It was chainsaws and getting people tarps over roofs where homes had been damaged or neighbors. And it was a great sense of well-being in the neighborhood. And we're up here, power lines are down. We banded together with food last night and had an outdoor get-together. And this is the kind of spirit that I think John wanted to see, not only on the local level, what we all want to see on the local level, but we want to see on the national level as well.
When you two were prisoners of war with others, and you finally were in either the same room where you were able to talk face to face, what was he like? Just tell us about his character and his demeanor.
Oh, he,
cheerleader, was he inspirational?
Well, I write poetry, as you know. This book, Taps on the Walls, and buried it for 40 years. And then John did the foreword to it, and was one of the motive forces, saying, "Hey, you got to publish that stuff that you conceived up there." But John had a spirit, an effervescent spirit. He had a great sense of humor and a great outlook and optimism. We had optimists and pessimists up there. Are you familiar with that?
Very. Yes.
Yeah, well, the pessimists thought we were going to die up there, and they weren't even going to send our bodies home. But the optimists were convinced they would send our bodies home. That's very funny. That's either a Borling original or
well, you don't
McCain original.
You don't know what you don't know what to laugh at. I mean, it's gallows humor, but
well, it gets you through every time except once. But who's counting? So the first thing is that resiliency and that sense of forward looking, and but a great sense of humor. And in the end, I think that's one of the marks of public men that we look for, is that depreciating sense of humor, that thought that you don't take yourself too seriously, and yet you do serious business, serious work, and you try to advance the cause of the country. I'm sitting up here reminding myself that all those who favor huge government and socialism, you know what they used before they used candles?
What?
Electricity.
Let me ask you this, though, about just on the POW experience. Much is made of McCain choosing not to go home when he was given the opportunity to do so. How inspirational was that decision that he made?
Very. We had a rule that was capped through the walls, through the chain of command, that nobody went home without nobody went home early without express approval by the chain of command, and we wanted to go out with the sick and wounded first, and the people that were up there the longest. And John, because of his extreme injuries, notwithstanding the fact that he had a certain notoriety as the son of Sink-Pack Commander, the admiral in charge of the Pacific, if you will, was put under a good deal of pressure, especially as the years went by, to accept early release, and he was steadfast and rejected that. There were some early releases. We did not, I think as a group, we were not proud of them. We did not sanction them, save in one case, and that was a fellow by the name of Doug Hegdel, who was a seaman, basic, who fell off a ship in the Tonkin Gulf and was swimming around and got picked up by Vietnamese authorities or fishermen, and they thought this guy was a CIA agent swimming to shore to do something outrageous, and they tortured the hell out of him until they figured out he was just, kind of a basic seaman because it was reported in the paper. And Doug Hegdel, this was before our names were public, memorized, as we all did, all the names that were in the system, passed through the walls, and he was offered the opportunity to go home early, and he got the blessing of senior leadership and went out with his head held high and took all our names out so people would know we were alive.
And you stay close.
Wow, that's interesting. Wow.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
you stay close.
John resisted that. John resisted that to the end and took a lot of grief. The early years, as you know, were horrific in terms of isolation or semi-isolation and brutal treatment. It never approached Geneva Convention standards, but it got up to something more tolerable in the 70s and beyond, or we never would have made it. So the object, again, wasn't to survive as much as it was to survive with honor. We wanted you guys to be proud of us, and that, looking back over those many years, I think if you look at the accomplishments and the attempts of advancing the cause of America by that group, in different ways, every guy has left footsteps that can be traced because we committed to try to do that over time. I'm working on something now called Service Over Self America, SOS America, that I believe has a way of kind of nation building in America and uses the military as a launch point. We can talk about that at a later time if you like.
Yeah, we will. And we honor you for your service, and what you went through is just, you're a true hero, and so is Senator John McCain. When I lived in Arizona, he was my senator too. But
you're very generous. That's a big term. I've served with some and stood in the shadow of others, but it's not a mantle I would choose to assume. Well, yeah. But thank you for kind words. I think John's example is going to go on to be with us for a time. But in the end, we've got to focus on the here and now. We've got some big things coming up in November in terms of the midterms, and the political process goes on. And we, the people, have a chance to express ourselves and ask, in fact, demand from government the kind of responsiveness to national concerns and needs, whereby the respect for the individual and the equality of opportunity is respected. So I'm no less passionate about the future of America today than I was yesterday or 40 years ago.
Do you have any comment, speaking of kind of service over self and the future, and as well as the here and now, any comment on our politics in the context of the eulogies that were provided McCain over the weekend, and just kind of in general with a look ahead to the midterms?
Well, again, I think families are entitled to expressions of grief and expressions of, it's like you write a paper 20 years ago and you go back and look at it today and you cringe sometimes, or the things that you said or done. Barney Frank, God love him for all of his inconsistencies, used to say, I don't always agree with everything I say. And I think that's an apt quote. But my concern about the political system is that we have, over time in America, hundreds of years, created a circumstance where politicians are entrenched. And John favored term limits. In fact, the night he made his speech at the Biltmore in a gracious way, recognizing the presidency of the election just over with President Obama, I know considered seriously. We chatted about it, that's it. I'm going to retire and become a senior statesman. But the lure of the Senate and the thought that he could have greater impact kept him in that chair. But I think if he could have gotten term limits from top to bottom, federal, state, local, somehow inscribed into the law of the land, that he would have gone for that. And all the arguments about, well, you're going to let staff rule things. Staff rules things anyway, if you really know about it. And you can have equal circumstances where staff turns over. I mean, it's a tough job, congressional staff or at the executive branch or judicial branch for that matter. And people float in and out. But I'm a believer that people who are long in office ought to leave, especially those people who have stood up to the electorate and said, gee, just elect me for a few terms and then I'll go away. And then they don't.
Yeah.
And I view that as a breaking of faith, big time. So if there's one thing we can do as a people, I think, is to vote out those who have been in for a long time in favor of new blood.
Well, then nowhere is that more pressing than Illinois, that's for sure. He is General John...
41, I know Mike Madigan a little bit, but 41 years is not political or democratic accountability. It's bloody tyranny. And if we as a people don't understand that, then we get, and I'm a guy from Illinois, I'm not moving out of Illinois, but just on the face, hell, the Communist Politburo didn't hang around that long. Not that I feel strongly on the matter.
Yeah, right. He is General John Borling, retired United States Air Force Major General. He was a POW for 6.5 years in Hanoi with John McCain. Whether he wants to be called one or not, he's an American hero, and we honor his service and the service of all those who were held captive with him and all those who served. General John Borling, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Talk to you again, Dan. Amy, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.